Western music uses a chromatic scale of 12 different tones to the octave. But what if it didn't? I'm the classical nerd, and today we're talking about microtonal music. Microtones are, by many commonly used definitions, any note that falls between the keys, so to speak, of a traditional keyboard layout. But this is actually rather narrow-minded. In fact, there are many systems of microtones, and trying to apply it to a keyboard sometimes isn't the best way to go about analyzing them. Musical pitches are registered in hertz. Doubling the hertz means that your pitch is going to go up one octave. For judging smaller musical distances, there is such a thing as the cent. Theorists and acousticians use this in order to differentiate between two notes. And the cent is very useful in this, because 100 cents equals 2 adjacent notes on a piano keyboard. Hertz are way too wide to really be used when talking about microtones, so the cent is really all that we're going to be using. So with 100 cents between notes and 12 notes, this gives us 1200 cents to the octave, which is plenty to work with. On the keyboard, you can split this into 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12 equal parts. Splitting it any other way gives you some kind of microtone. Mathematically speaking, you could even have a scale with 1200 notes to the octave, one note per cent going up. But the problem is that you reach a point of indistinguishability well before this point. You see, variations in mere cents are impossible for our ears to discern, and this is actually what makes orchestral string sections or choirs sound so rich. There is microtonal fluctuation at the cent level. We can't perceive it actively, but it makes them sound very, very rich and very, very full. As one might imagine, there are some microtonal scales that are more common than others. And generally, since they repeat every octave, we refer to them by how many pitches there are per octave. And generally speaking, the scales that we use, the notes are equally spaced apart from one another. And so they're referred to as tuned in equal temperament. So for example, the chromatic scale is 12 TET, 12-tone equal temperament, whereas the quarter-tone scale, 24 notes per octave, twice the number of our usual 12, is also called 24 TET. 72 TET has, you guessed it, 72 notes per octave. If the number is divisible by 12, it makes it rather easy to map to our keyboard, and makes it a little bit easier to notate using our traditional 5-line notation that was made for the 12-tone system. So 24 TET is referred to as the quarter-tone scale because its smallest step is half of a half step, or a quarter step, and thus a quarter tone. 72 TET is called the 12th-tone scale, because each step is 1/12 of a whole step. For all practical purposes, the 12th-tone scale is the smallest practical microtonal scale. It's very hard for our ears to distinguish between successive steps, because they're a little over 16 cents apart. Western composers are only relatively recently making use of these novel scales, within the past 100 years or so, so notation still really isn't standardized. In fact, the only microtonal system of notation that has become anything close to a standard is quarter tones. And even then, some composers still opt for their own systems of notation. It's why any piece containing microtones should have a preamble explaining the use of the symbols. Quarter tones have become common enough in contemporary music that the 4 new accidentals you have to use in this system have become pretty much standardized. They are the quarter-step sharp, the three-quarter-step sharp, the quarter-step flat, and the three-quarter-step flat. But some composers have opted for notations that look like this, or this, this, or this. Quarter tones have an eerie and unstable feeling about them, and the fact that they're pretty easy to integrate into traditional notation means that they've been a pretty popular system. Charles Ives wrote 3 innovative quarter-tone pieces for 2 pianos, while in Europe, Alois Haba and Ivan Wyschnegradsky were experimenting with all sorts of microtonal systems, from quarter tones all the way up to 12th tones. Haba wrote string quartets in 6th tones, while Wyschnegradsky wrote a piece for 6 pianos, 5 of which are detuned in 12th tones. Around the same time, Mexican composer Julian Carrillo based his entire musical philosophy on notes that reside outside of the standard 12, in a theory he dubbed the 13th sound. And microtones may be odd to Western ears, but they're an integral part of music from other cultures. Arabic music makes use of what we would call the quarter tone, as did the ancient Greek modes, of which there were thousands, one for each piece practically. They're used pretty freely in Balinese gamelan music, and are even used in the blues in order to denote expressiveness. Other times microtones are used to tune instruments to pure harmonics instead of the slightly detuned system that we have that makes up the 12 notes. In fact, the 11th harmonic is pretty much exactly F half sharp. But what if you're splitting the octave into ways that aren't divisible by 12? All of a sudden, you can't really notate it. I mean, sure, you can split the octave into 11 or 13 ways, but trying to notate this on a system designed for 12 notes can barely handle quarter tones. Composer and microtonal theorist Easley Blackwood, who wrote a collection of electronic microtonal etudes, used a legend at the beginning of the scores to map out how he was going to apply undivisible by 12 divisions of the octave to a 12-note friendly system. The eerie 13 TET in Blackwood's hands looks a bit like this. These are traditional 12-note accidentals, but they cannot be read as if applying to 12 notes per octave. This is perhaps the only way to fuse unusual systems of tuning into traditional 5-line notation. Finally, as if this wasn't already enough, some novel scales have been formed by splitting intervals other than the octave. The bohlen-pierce scale, for instance, splits the 3-to-1 ratio, which is the octave and the fifth, and this system is known as the tritave. Collectively, any scale that does this is known as a non-octave repeating scale. You'd think they would have found a cooler name for it, but apparently they haven't. In total, although microtones have been used for millennia across the world, and in Western music for over 100 years, there is still so much more to be appreciated and to be explored.